is The Song That Got Me Through, and I'm your co-host, Anil Maharjan. This week, we spoke to our guest about the soundtrack of the 2004 film Garden State. We talked about how the movie brought back nostalgic memories of his childhood, and how revisiting the soundtrack a decade later helped him cope with his mother's passing. While he can still listen to that album, I can no longer listen to Frank Turner's Long Live the Queen. We'll find more about that later on. Finally, we unearthed the first of our albums that Sarah, Cole, and I ever had on our iPods. One of us had Oingo Boingo, and someone else had Rise Against. I'm sure you can't guess who had which. If you want to be on the show, or find a playlist with all songs ever featured on the show, check out the link in our Instagram page or in the show notes. If you have any questions, email us, thesongthatgotmethrough@gmail.com. Now, enjoy the show.
Hey, Anil.
Hey, Sarah, how's it going this week?
Actually, really great. What are you gonna do with your half day on Friday?
My half day. I think I'm going to try to see if my wife can cut my hair for me. I decided to go with just a mustache after growing out my facial hair for 6 months. And with the current state of my hair, I look like a Nepalese Michael Cera. Yeah, I definitely need some help there. What are you doing on your short Friday?
Well, I just found out that our short Friday's even shorter. We're gonna be signing off at 1 instead of 3, so I have 2 extra hours to just make more of my life. I'll probably learn a second language at that time, maybe go
So you're
get
going to read conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we're being honest with each other here.
Oh.
Uh,
Yeah, that's what I
well,
plan to do. I plan to read up on the latest conspiracy theories, probably around this, what some people have been calling a plandemic, but we won't get into it.
okay. I just want you to know, I recently saw a second video showing that Paul McCartney has actually been dead for years, and that Paul McCartney was replaced, similar to Avril Lavigne. So I just want you to know that conspiracy theory is still on my radar.
That's the first conspiracy theory you told me about, and that's how I knew that you and I would get along, is because you were also a fellow conspiracy theory nut.
Well, I'm
Maybe
excited
not
this
to my
week.
degree.
I'm very excited this week because I think that our guest is also a conspiracy theorist. I don't know if that's actually true,
Perfect.
but sir, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I can add to that population of conspiracy theorists. Probably not as much as you, Neil and Sarah. I'm Cole Hawkinson, um, and if you want, Neil, I can go with a quick background. I'm
Yeah.
I'm from Branchburg, New Jersey, the same hometown Anil's from. Anil and I grew up together and went to the same middle school and high school. I'm now located in Boston, Massachusetts, so that's where I'm calling in from during the current pandemic. Um, so basically, a quick snippet. After high school, I went to Boston College. Ended up um, going there for 4 years, and then around the time when my mother passed in 2015, I ended up moving back to New Jersey, did some more work, and ended up wanting to go back to Boston. There's great work opportunities there, and also my now fiance was living up there, so I had a good amount of personal and professional reasons to go back to Boston, and it's a really beautiful and fun city from the times I've been there. So since 2017, I've been living here, and I currently work in Cambridge. So basically, a little bit of moving between New Jersey and Boston, but not nearly as a lot of moving as you have done, Anil.
Yeah. I did a lot of moving around in New Jersey, and then just took the small move out to Seattle. But speaking of New Jersey, I feel like New Jersey ties nicely into the song that you're going to be talking about this week.
That's a beautiful segue.
Oh my God. While I was supposed to be working on the banter for Sarah in my intro, I was thinking about that segue. So I was so glad I got to use it.
Yeah, so the song choice, and you'll probably knew this before. I wanted to kind of like pick an album or a soundtrack because what I wanted to like, what really spoke to me was the soundtrack that came out with the movie Garden State. Anil, I don't know if you've seen the movie or Sarah, if you have. Very much the plot is centered around New Jersey, hence the title Garden State. But
I
this
have
movie
not
came out.
seen the movie, but I did extensive research about 10 minutes leading into this podcast, and now I do wanna watch it.
Wait, Sarah, you haven't seen it?
I haven't, but I like Zach Braff and I like well, I just almost called her Nicole Kidman, but I meant Natalie Portman.
Same,
Uh,
same.
and then I thought that because I watched the trailer before looking up who the cast was, and I don't know if anyone else would agree with me, but Peter Sarsgaard, however you say his last
Yep,
name, looks a little bit like Kiefer Sutherland.
he does. That's a good point. I never thought of it that way.
I'm still in a state of shock that Sarah has not seen Garden State. I have seen it way too many times. My sister was a film major in her undergrad, and Garden State at the time was one of her favorite movies. And just in addition to it being a phenomenal movie, like I think that was the first time that a lot of people were exposed to a lot of the different bands that were on that soundtrack, because
Yes,
if you actually search Garden State like on YouTube, it immediately pops up with Garden State soundtrack.
the soundtrack won a Grammy.
Oh,
It was,
really?
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
realize
Well,
that.
Zach
Yeah,
Braff received the Grammy for his soundtrack album because he was the one who put it together and, of course, directed um, and written the movie. So
yeah, and I think for a lot of people that was the first time that they heard the Shins. Like that was
yeah, there's
that.
two Shin
Yeah,
songs on here, and it was basically like it gave indie pop that kind of that what you would call it, that base plate, just to be more mainstream, and it kind of like got a lot of people into it, basically from like how the movie was very indie based. um I think, and also just the soundtrack itself, it was a great opening for that.
yeah. So I could sit and talk about this movie for way too long, but can you kind of tell us a little bit of your story surrounding the soundtrack and the movie in general?
Yeah, so the movie, came out in 2004, but by the time I really saw it, it was probably along the lines of like 2006. That's probably when my parents probably got it on DVD. So my parents both from New Jersey, grew up in New Jersey, so they loved the movie and they would watch it all the time. And so this is around eighth grade, early high school, when they were always watching this movie. So, just like them, I was wanted to watch and learn about this movie, and I loved it. Of course, being from New Jersey definitely helps, and I'm pretty sure this movie does have a cult following, but it's probably mostly from people from New Jersey. But
Yeah.
it was a great movie, and it was like one of the first like adult movies I liked, because when you're at that age, eighth grade, freshman year of high school, as a young boy, you're just like looking for the next like action movie, superhero movie,
And
etc.
also like super bad and those sort of like really dumb comedies were having a
Yes,
heyday then too.
exactly. Like I want to see when the next like Will Ferrell movie was coming out. It wasn't. That's kind of where I was in pop culture. So this was a big thing for me to like a serious, like really well written movie.
Mhm.
And the movie was great and I loved it, but then the soundtrack that was put together for it was great. And I didn't really have that much of like a music, like music wasn't that big in my life growing up. Most of the music I got was usually from my friends. Anil, you and Chris had a very big
I
influence.
apologize for that so much.
Well, because you two were very, very like well versed in music, and like you were very like it was a big thing in both of your lives, and it was really nice to see that, because that was something that I never really got attached to as much. I didn't like appreciate it as much. But yeah, from like interacting with my friends, and then especially this playlist, I really fell in love with the playlist. And it was one of those playlists that you can just listen and study to. A lot of these songs are catchy. They're a little bit on the softer side. It's really something that you can just listen to while studying or just listen to while walking. Um, it's just a really good background music to listen to, where he's like, this is the soundtrack of my life kind of thing. So I really like this playlist, and I used to play it all the time on iTunes because, of course, my dad had bought the soundtrack on iTunes, and I had access to the family iTunes. So on my first iPod, I was listening to this all the time. And so, high school went, and I moved away from using iTunes a lot, and I got caught up in Spotify and Pandora when college hit, and I kind of forgot about this playlist. Of course, you would hear the songs, now and again, but I kind of like didn't really listen to the set playlist anymore because I didn't have access to iTunes anymore. Um, and it, right at the end of college, so my mom was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme, which is a rare and very aggressive form of brain cancer. And she was diagnosed right as I was finishing college. And unfortunately, she ended up passing. And it stinks because this is a very particularly aggressive form of brain tumor, and like people don't really survive past 10 to 12 months, and she fit that, and she passed within a year. So me graduating college, I had a plan to like stay in Boston and find a job, and I decided to move back to New Jersey, just to be with my family. And as we were dealing with this as a family and being a support structure for each other, I was turning to trying to help me get through it. And as you're going through Spotify and you're looking at music to listen to, I ended up finding a soundtrack put together of Garden State, and it was just accidentally finding it and listening to it later. It's very nostalgic. It's a very nostalgic feel to listen to something that you grew up listening to a lot, like a few years back. And it kind of brought me back to the movie. And then it was just like, oh, my life has a lot of parallels to what happened in the movie, because in the movie, the main character's mother passes away and he moves back to New Jersey. That's the biggest parallel. Like, I didn't end up meeting Natalie Portman in New Jersey. I didn't have that going on. I was already with my girlfriend at the time. So, but the idea of the movie, of him moving back to New Jersey and dealing with this and the issues that he had with it, it kind of all came together in me listening to the soundtrack again, and specifically, so there's the band at the time, Frou Frou, which actually was composed of Imogen Heap. She was the singer in this band with Guy
Oh, I didn't
Sigsworth.
realize that.
Yeah, she is the singer in the song that I liked listened to the most out of this, called "Let Go." And the lyrics and the feel of this song are very much how I was feeling around the time of my mom passing. So it was something that I listened to a lot, and I was in that mental state of shock where I didn't really have a lot of emotions in reacting to my mom passing, but I knew I wanted to, and I just kind of wanted to. I felt like I was like stuck in a rut, and I wanted to know, how do I move on from this, and how do I like take what I have, and continue to move forward with my life, because you don't expect to lose a parent so soon in your life. But yeah, so "Let Go," out of the 13 songs in the playlist, was probably one of the songs that resonated with me the most.
And I, I, one of the things that stands out to me is like I definitely had a very similar situation
Hmm.
with trying to just find something to listen to or find some form of media to take your mind off of death.
Hmm.
I know that like when my grandmother passed away, I just listened to the Frank Turner song "Long Live the Queen," and I listened to that so many times during that period of time that it's actually really hard for me to listen to it now.
Hmm.
Um, for you in this soundtrack, did you have enough background, or did you have enough familiarity and I guess background with this album that you can still listen to it now, or do you very much associate it to that period of time?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was it's really a unique situation when I listened to this soundtrack, and two things happen. you know, I think of the time in high school. I think of the time growing up because just listening to this song just screams like early 2000s, like having Coldplay in this, that that kind of era. It was, it's very nostalgic because that was the time that we grew up in. That's like usually the first thing that hits me when I listen to the soundtrack. And there was that second stage where I was just listening to it shortly after my mom passed. So now when I listen to it now, there's like that second feel of, this is what I listen to help me get through it. And it's not so much a negative feeling. It's not like I try to avoid it because it reminds me of it. It kind of reminds me of how I was able to move forward. So I kind of almost have like a positive connotation with it.
And do you watch the movie very often, or is that just sort of how you were introduced to these songs that resonate so closely to you?
Yeah, so I've seen the movie a few times, but actually now that I think about it, Sarah, the last time I saw the movie was about 2 years ago. I saw it recently because just because every once in a while I like to watch it, but it's not something I'm continuously watching. But you just reminded me that I probably want to go watch it again soon.
Yeah, well, I'll be watching it here pretty soon too, just to know what all the rave is about.
I think you'll really like it, Sarah, because I don't think it tries too hard to be a good film. It's just a good film from how it is.
Well, I didn't even realize that Zach Braff has written and directed multiple movies.
Yeah, and Sarah, I guarantee you that once you watch it, you will always remember the scene where they are screaming, or they're yelling in the rain
In a
at something.
quarry.
Yes,
Where they're
that I
standing on a
think.
bus or something?
They're like standing on an old like digger, and it's like in a quarry around Newark. It's like towards the end of the movie, but it's like, yeah, they're just screaming into a hole.
Yeah, that is the one scene that I think everyone takes from that movie. Like
Yep.
it's both like seeing them do it is very cathartic, but then just like that scene is just so perfect that I guarantee you that once you watch that movie, you will always remember that one scene.
Yeah, I can't wait till the COVID pandemic's over so I can go outside and yell into holes.
Yeah, exactly.
Does this movie have as much meaning and these songs, the soundtrack have as much meaning to your family as well?
I think especially my father, he really did like this movie. And this is a man who was, both of my grandparents went to Rutgers, and he was born in New Jersey, but he grew up in Wyoming, so he considers himself um, a cowboy, out growing up in Wyoming. But he really does like love this movie, and I think to him it's almost like a nostalgic thing because when he was growing up in Wyoming, his grandparents and a lot of the family were still on the East Coast, and I think, this was like the feel good movie that him and my mom would watch a lot. So I would definitely think that maybe maybe not so much the soundtrack specifically, but the movie itself like would definitely have that connection with him.
Yeah. I like that when you think about the soundtrack and everything, it brings back more positive memories. I think, like Anil said, the song that you listened to, Anil, you can't really listen to right now anymore after listening to it after your grandmother passed. I think that's an interesting difference.
My sister actually quoted it at like a piece of it at my grandmother's funeral, and after that, I had not listened to the song. Just also partially because it doesn't come on all the time. But during the initial stages of this quarantine, the artist Frank Turner he was doing a bunch of sessions from his house, and this is one of his famous songs. And I kind of knew he was going to play it, and when he started playing the first few chords of the song, I actually got emotional. And so when we were talking about songs that make you cry a couple weeks ago, I failed to remember this, and I think it was my brain blocking it out. But even hearing the first few chords to this song actually made me get very emotional. And then when he sang the actual lyric that my sister had quoted during the funeral, I absolutely lost it. So I don't even think I can ever listen to that song again. But yeah, to your point, Sarah, it is really interesting how you can go in kind of this exact opposite, like very different ways of associating a song with a memory. But yeah, so Cole, I am interested to ask you this.
Yeah.
How was it different for you handling your mother's passing, being that you were kind of the oldest child in the family? Did you kind of feel that you had a different responsibility? And part of the reason that I asked that question is I was, I was on the opposite end of this, where I was the youngest one in the family, and I kind of felt like no one really expected much of me.
No, that's actually a really good question because I did have that sense of, that responsibility, or another way to put it, I I never cried. And it's not like I felt like I had to and I was stopping myself. Um, I kind of wish I did, but it's almost like I feel like, psychologically something was telling me, you need to be strong because you're the oldest.
Mhm,
This is huge, and you need to be there for everyone. You need to be the support system, because of course, my dad has had to deal with the process of this,
mhm,
not only like, from an emotional standpoint, of course, but like, losing your spouse and what all the things that need to change now because of that, moving everything out of her, what was in her name, specific account. So he was caught up in that, and the whole, the planning of the funeral. And that was, a definitely emotional tax on him, especially because him and my mom had to talk about this when she was alive, knowing that she wasn't going to make it, which was probably the hardest thing that he's ever had to do. So for me, not just for my close family, but for my whole side of the family, at the funeral and, at the wake, I was, I had a subconscious, like, I need to be strong and be the support system for everyone. And so it's not like I was consciously thinking that. I guess I can think about it now, almost like performing a, doing psychology on my past self. But I know I had that subconscious thing in my head telling me so, telling myself that. So
mhm. Felt like I had to grow up a little bit after that. I mean, this was my grandmother, not my mother, and I know it's a lot different. But it was like I felt like a child. Like I've really felt like I was a child, and like I was the youngest one because I was really expected to do the least out of everybody. But you know, I think let's try to end this one on a real high note here. I kind of like to ask some random questions at the end, just for the heck of it.
yeah.
And one of the things that you mentioned was iTunes and an iPod. What was the first thing that you ever put on your iPod?
So I always asked for an iPod. So this is a quick background. I always was asking for an iPod. I never got one. Back when it was just like the big the original iPods, and then they had the minis with the swirl to scroll up and down. I kept on asking for one. I never got one. Do you want to know what the first one I got was? An iPod Shuffle. The the first shuffle, like the first one that was just
The
like a
most
hundred
useless one.
songs maybe, and it had no screen, and you just had to guess. Um, and what was on there was just like what my dad had on iTunes. So it was all like AC/DC, 80s Van Halen. It was all like 80s rock. And that's what I liked. I was just like listening to this. And it's funny because it's like when you're growing up, you have that like, oh, what people think the songs I listen to are probably weird. Like, no one listens to this. No one knows who these people are. I can't let people know I like listen to these songs. So I
Yeah.
would like listen to it on the bus and not let any, like, I'm just like, if people ask like, what do you listen to? I'm like, oh, Justin Timberlake, Britney Spears, what everyone likes.
Fair enough. Sarah, what was the first thing that you put on your iPod?
I'm impressed, Cole, that you remember so specifically. There, I must have some memory loss. I couldn't tell you what the first thing I put on, like that I myself put on, because I was kind of in the same situation where my parents gave me an iPod Shuffle,
Hmm.
and my dad was the one that had the iTunes, and so I was all like always listening to whatever he put on there, and it was like a lot of Dean Martin and, like, there's one that I'm blanking on the name of it, but it like, it's a weird song, but it's a good song. I'm gonna find it.
You know, I guess I'm the weird one because I remember the exact first album that I put on my iPod. I remember not only putting, oh god, I hate to admit it, but it was Rise Against Siren Songs of the Counterculture. I remember being so proud of that iPod that I had to like be the usher in my church that Sunday. I must have bought it on a Saturday night. And I sat there with my headphones in during church listening to Rise Against, and my mom was so upset with me. But I've always loved music, so I'll try to give myself a pass on that one. But
Okay, I found the song. It's called "Dead Man's Party" by Oingo Boingo. That's why it's stuck in my head, is because it's such a weird.
uh, well, I'm glad I'm glad we all got to learn that together about one another. Uh, Cole, thank you so much for coming on and telling your story, and making me want to go back and watch Garden State again.
Of
Uh,
course.
yeah, I really appreciate it. It's also given Sarah a good homework assignment to go watch this
Yes.
phenomenal piece of cinema history.
Everyone loves a good homework assignment, and it was great to meet you, Sarah, and Anil. It's great to connect with you again.
Yeah.
Hopefully, maybe I can make a trip out to Seattle once this is all over, and I can visit.
We, Sarah and I will personally give you a tour around Seattle when you get here.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
will.
that'll be awesome. Yeah, that'll be great.
We'll
I've
take
only
you
been
to the
once.
crocodile. That's the only place you need to go.
All right, I'll
Yeah.
keep that in mind.
Don't make that the one place you go, please.
I don't want to disappoint Anil.
Well, Cole, thanks again. And Sarah, we'll do this again next week.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Have a good week, everybody. This episode was edited by me, Anil Maharjan. My co-host is Sarah Harrison. Additional editing and mixing was done by Chris Maffei at Multitrack Minds. You can check out their full line of services at multitrackminds.com. Special thanks this week to Cole for telling his story. If you want to hear the music discussed in this episode, search Spotify for The Playlist That Got Me Through. Also, we have started uploading our episodes to YouTube. One day, we will monetize and open up a Shopify store that just sells t-shirts with my face on it. Until then, if you are interested in being on the show, submit the form on our Instagram page, or email us, thesongthatgotmethrough@gmail.com. Till next time, don't lose touch.
I know how it feels to be down outside. It all comes to coming around.